It was dark at first, but then the trio found themselves back on the Santa Monica beach. Now it made sense. What belongs to the sea will always return to the sea. They got to shore and noticed the sun was rising. They knew right away what day it was now. June 21st, the summer solstice. They had only till midnight to get from California all the way back to New York to return the boat to Olympus, or war would start. Percy couldn't believe it, but they had traveled all that way just to find out Hades wasn't the god who had turned. Whoever it was honestly had a problem with Zeus and Hades, and possibly even Poseidon, and just decided to frame Percy just because he was Poseidon's kid who was born by mistake. Percy knew someone he met somewhere wanted trouble. But who would want war that bad? Grover asked. Gee, let me think, said Percy. In the distance, there he was, Ares, just sitting on his bike waiting for them with a baseball bat over his shoulder.
Hey, kid, he said, you were supposed to die.
You tricked me, Percy said angrily. You stole Hades' helm and the bolt. You framed me by putting the bolt in the bag, didn't you?
Nah, I didn't take either, Ares said. Not personally. Gods taking each other's symbols of power, that's a big no-no. And you're not the only demigod who does favors.
Who was it then? Clarice? Percy asked.
Don't matter,
Ares said.
Point is, the big three will soon be going ballistic on each other with anger and destruction, and Hades still doesn't know who took this.
And there it was. Hades' helm of darkness.
Nothing like a little show of relatives fighting, huh?
But why send it to Hades? Percy asked. Why not keep it for yourself?
Hey, yeah, Ares said. Why didn't I?
Ares froze for a second, like he was listening to a voice in his head. It wasn't your idea to steal the bolt, wasn't it? Percy asked. It's that thing in the pit down there, he said. Whatever it is, it's manipulating you. It can do that, can't it? You were sent to look for the thief, but it controlled you to not turn him in. Instead, you kept the items and passed them on to me.
I'm the god of war, Ares shouted, and I take orders from no one. Anyway, you should have died, so I'm gonna have to kill you myself. Nothing personal.
He rose up his bat, and it magically transformed into a sword. You like fights, so how about a fair one, said Percy. If you win, take the bolt, and kill me if you want. If I win, I get both the helm and the bolt, and you leave.
You're asking for it, kid,
said Ares. Percy handed Annabeth the bolt and took out Riptide, and his ADHD kicked in. He dodged Ares' sword, blocked it, then Ares kicked Percy in the chest so hard he went flying a few feet away and dropped his sword. Then Percy came up with an idea. He waited for Ares to get closer, and then... splash! He managed to control the seawater and made a 6-foot wall that pushed Ares to the ground. His shades fell off and revealed his glowing red eyes. Then Percy came behind him and swung Riptide at his heel, and golden blood spilled out. Then something happened. While Ares was now distracted by his wound, Percy felt a dark, cold presence. It made him feel as if all hope was lost. Ares looked at him so viciously. When he spoke, he didn't sound like him.
You made a very bad enemy, godling, he said. You've sealed your fate. Every time you raise your blade or hope for success in any way, you will feel my curse. Beware, Perseus Jackson. Beware.
Then, without warning, Ares' body glowed as bright as the sun. Percy looked away. He knew if he saw the god in his true form, he'd incinerate into nothing. But instead of transforming, he became brighter and brighter until it just stopped. And Ares was gone. Then a couple of Furies who were watching from a distance came up to Percy. So it wasn't you after all, said the Fury who had once been Miss Dodds. No, I wasn't, Percy said. Then he handed her the helm. Here, take that back to Lord Hades, he said. Tell him to call off the war. Live well, Percy Jackson, she said. Become a true hero. And then she was gone. Then Percy looked at his friends. "We have to get back to New York before midnight," he said. "But that's impossible," said Annabeth. "Then we have no choice," said Percy. "We have to fly there. It's a risk we'll have to take if we want to be there on time." Minutes later, the mist seemed to finally pay off. People on the local news were saying that Percy wasn't a criminal after all. They said he had caused all that commotion on that bus in New Jersey just trying to escape his crazy kidnapper, aka Ares, and that Ares caused the explosion in the St. Louis Arch. No 12-year-old could do that. There was also a report from Denver, Colorado, from witnesses who took photos of the kidnapper threatening the boy outside a diner. And just recently, in the Santa Monica Beach, they said the kidnapper had mysteriously fled in the middle of a gunfight with the kid. Percy and his friends were now safe and sound in police custody. The reporters surrounding them kept asking questions, and Percy just decided to play along. He pretended to act sad and said that he was desperate to see his stepdad again and make things up for him. Just doing that got the cops and reporters so moved, they started passing around a hat to raise enough money for 3 tickets to the next flight to New York. They were on their way. Percy could only assume Zeus would cut them enough slack and give them a chance. Plus, the bolt would be in the plane with him, so Percy could also assume Zeus wouldn't dare risk destroying his own valuable possession, and boy was Percy lucky. One thing was for sure, a child of the sea god did not belong high above the earth. Every time they shook through the wind, well, let's just say Percy felt nervous and uncomfortable. As soon as they made it back to New York, they were right on time. The deadline was just minutes away. But Percy decided it was better to do this alone, so he asked Grover and Annabeth to meet back at camp. So when they parted, Percy took a cab straight up to the Empire State Building, all alone, with the bolt in his bag. He went up to the front desk and asked the security guard for the key to the 600th floor. At first he didn't believe what Percy said, at least until he showed him the bolt. Obviously the guy possibly only looked mortal, and it was his job to guard not just the building, but also the gate to Olympus. He probably would have called for backup otherwise. He gave Percy the key, and he took it into the elevator when no one else was in there. When he slipped the key into the slot, it disappeared, and a new button that said 600 appeared. When he pressed it, the elevator immediately shot upward. When the doors opened, Percy found himself high in the sky. He couldn't believe his eyes. He stood in front of the steps to Olympus. It was a city of marble and gold, all on a mountain peak, with a huge temple at the top. Percy knew it had to be thousands of years old, but it looked so clean and new. The fact about a big, ancient Greek city on a mountain floating in the sky over New York didn't make much sense to Percy, but he didn't have time to worry about it. He climbed the high flight of stairs until he eventually came to the top, where he stood in front of the huge twin doors of a giant-sized temple. The doors opened to an amazing throne room. Inside, the super high ceiling was dome-shaped and decorated with constellations. In the middle of the floor was a round fireplace. Going around the room was a huge U-shaped line of 12 throne chairs, almost like the cabins in Camp Half-Blood. They were all empty except 2 of them that were towards the middle. Sitting on the head throne was Zeus, first of the big 3, king of Olympus, god of the sky and lightning. He wasn't exactly the way Percy had imagined him or how he looked in pictures, but then again, none of the gods he had met weren't either. He had gray eyes that matched his long hair and had a well-trimmed beard. He was dressed in a dark blue suit and looked pretty serious. Sitting on his right was another god who Percy knew right away was his father. Poseidon, second of the big 3, god of the seas. Like his brother, also had facial hair. He wore beige pants and a Bahama shirt. He had black messy hair and green eyes, just like Percy. He had a good smile too. Percy could tell he smiled a lot. His chair had a built-in holster for his trident, kind of like how fishermen have for their fishing poles. Like Hades, they were giant size. Percy went closer to them, addressed himself, and told Zeus about the whole journey. He tried to convince him that he wasn't the thief, and he still hadn't figured out who it really was, and whoever it was passed it on to Ares, also that Ares was trying to get involved and help start the war. Then Percy pulled out the cylinder. Zeus stretched out his hand and the bolt flew into it. Then the bolt grew into what looked like the classic long zigzag lightning bolt.
"I sense you speak the truth," said Zeus, "but for Ares to do such a thing is most unlike him."
"He is proud and impulsive," Poseidon said. "It runs in the family." "Lord Ares didn't act alone," said Percy. "Someone or something came up with the idea." Then he told them about the dream he had with the voice in the Tartarus pit and about the evil presence at the Santa Monica beach. Then the two gods looked at each other.
"We will speak of this no more," said Zeus. "You've done me good service, boy, though I do not like what your arrival means for the future of Olympus. But for the family's sake, for peace, and to show you my thanks, I shall let you live."
Thank you, sir," Percy said.
"But be warned, do not presume to fly through the skies again, or you shall taste this bolt."
In a flash of light, Zeus was gone, and Percy was left alone with his father. "I think your uncle would have made a good god of theater with his dramatic exits," said Poseidon. "Sir? Father?" Percy asked. "Any idea at all what it was that was in that pit?"
"You haven't guessed yet?"
Poseidon asked. Percy thought for a moment and remembered some stories he was told about the Olympians and their father. "Kronos," Percy said. He guessed it right. Then Poseidon mentioned to him about the story of how Zeus chopped up their father, Kronos the Titan Lord, into 1,000 pieces. Then threw all his remains down the depths of Tartarus.
"But it seems that Titans cannot die any more than we gods can,"
Poseidon said.
"Now whatever's left of Kronos is in some way still remaining alive, and still hungers for power."
"He's coming back," said Percy. "He's been trying to tell me that in the pit."
"It's all right," said Poseidon. "You've completed your quest. You and your friends are safe now, and you're innocent. That's what matters now."
"But—" Percy stopped himself. He didn't want to upset the one god who was technically the only god on his side. "As you wish, father," he said. Poseidon smiled.
"Obedience does not come naturally to you, does it? Well, the sea does not like to be restrained."
He stood up from his chair, grabbed his trident, shrunk down to normal human size, and told Percy that his mom was waiting for him at home. Percy felt so relieved he almost felt like crying.
"After you recovered his home, even the Lord of the Dead pays his debts," Poseidon said. "Also, there is a package waiting for you there which you will have to make an important choice with. No one can decide your path, Percy. That's up to you. You'll understand when you find it there. Your mother's quite the queen, by the way. I've never met such a woman. Also, I'm so sorry you were born, Percy. A hero's fate is never a happy fate."
It felt kind of weird hearing him say that, but Percy said, "I don't mind." Then he turned around and headed for the door, but Poseidon got his attention.
"You've done well, Perseus, and whatever else you do, just remember, you are a true son of Poseidon."
Even though he felt bad that he might never see his dad again, Percy knew he would always be watching out for him. So then he caught another ride to his mom's apartment. When he got there, Sally opened the door and they hugged each other so tight. But Percy only stayed long enough to help Sally make her choice about Gabe, with a little gift from the gods. Go ahead, take a wild guess.